this thing becomes even more crazy when we get used to our new state of home. Let's say we all died. Okay, now we are, instead of sitting here and doing a Zoom talk, let's say we are on the astral level, which will be exactly like we experience our reality now. There won't be any difference. But as soon as we start sort of becoming more aware of our state, this is a phenomena which you hear very often from people who have a near-death experience. They always report when they say, when they're told, that was a dream, they say, no, it wasn't a dream, it was more real than this life is. And that is very often an experience we have when we translate onto the astral level, or when we project as astral traveler to the astral level. Everything becomes more real. We have got a feeling of super reality. Now, as our mind, as our awareness becomes more lucid, as we get more used to it and our mind expands, our environment becomes more sublime, and it becomes, curiously, everything becomes more real. The colors become more bright, become more vivid. Suddenly our whole perception, our perceptual awareness is much more amplified. We can hear better, we can taste better, we can smell better, we can read people's thoughts. Not only that, at a certain point, when people talk about their holidays they had in the Bahamas or something, instead of just listening to them, we can actually be there with them. And we can experiencing what they're trying to tell us as if we were actually there. And so gradually, as our awareness expands, our consciousness expands as well. And this is really, really interesting, and that really adds a completely new dimension to the afterlife world, which is not very often reported, because most people who are interested in the astral level, their primary entry point into the astral world is wanting to connect to the people who they deem to have lost in physical life. So that is a major interest. But I've been there so many times and spent hundreds of hours. It gave me the opportunity to look into more detail and find out the things which were, all the little extra things, the bonuses. And also the other thing I did, because I'm a meditator, I didn't set out to get into the afterlife territories or have out-of-body experience. That was not my primary concern. My primary concern was to become fully awake to the potential of awareness, of consciousness, to the full potential of consciousness. And then in my first book, Multidimensional Man, I found a spirit guide, if you like, who was an old Chinese master who would introduce me into the higher states of consciousness. And the way he would do that, he would train me. He would give me mental tasks I had to solve. I had to solve riddles. And then much further along, he communicated with me, not via language, but via images and symbols. And all these symbols he gave me, they gave me a little bit of a deeper understanding of higher states of consciousness. And then after about, I think it was about five or 6 years, he introduced me into these higher states of consciousness. And this is where things really change, because up to then, what we experience and was normally called the afterlife realms or the astral realms is something that is to do with our identification, is to do with our our likes, our dislikes, our preferences, our identification with our jobs, our skills, our families, all the things which we feel is the sum total of who we are. But this is not really the core of who we really are. And in order to get into a higher state of consciousness, all these identifications, they just have to be surrendered. They have to be given up, and that's called the ego death. And I was asking, as I submitted one video, I was asked, is there a second death? After you die, is there a second death? And I have to say, yes, there is a second death if you want to go that far, and that is the ego death. And what the ego death does, it strips all the limitations which we impose ourselves by identifying ourselves with certain aspects in life. Once this is stripped away, we become free, we are liberated, and suddenly a much greater aspect of ourselves becomes apparent. And that can happen in a variety of different ways. It happened to me on several occasions. At one point I was meditating, and I was suddenly felt kind of uncomfortable and anxious, because I knew there was something bigger waiting, and so I pursued the meditation further. And then I found there was another aspect of myself which was a greater aspect, and it was waiting for me. And I knew in order to unite with this aspect, it was sort of teasing me towards it, and I had to surrender this thing which I thought was me. But the moment I did so, I noticed the other aspect was actually the real me. And this is a thing which happens in lots of different ways. It happens in literature. It's been described in a variety of different ways. Suddenly, this limitation of myself was stripped away, and I suddenly felt, oh, I'm home. This is me, who I really am. And that can have a variety of different ways. In another experience I had was as if I felt I was burdened down with a heavy coat I was wearing, as if I was coming out from the cold of the winter and getting into a warm room, and I was still wearing my winter coat, and it was so hot I couldn't bear it. So I had to leave this coat behind, which was basically my ego identification, until I entered into this warm room, which not only was warmer, but it was also my home, where I felt comfortable. It was me. It was who I'm supposed to be. Now this, once we have gone through this second death, this threshold, we actually become more of who we are, and instead of losing something, we are gaining incredibly new aspects in our life. We become more powerful, more joyous, and of course our world becomes incredibly rich. Our senses expand, our awareness expands, and this is really a completely new thing which I touched on in previous videos. Now the reality, to get back to it, the reality becomes even more, even sharper, more real, until we get to the core aspect of who we really are, when all the things which went on before feel more like a cut-down version of our real self, feel like a dream. Our worldly life, which we call our physical life, just fades into insignificance, it becomes like a dream, and we wake up to an eternal life. And not only that, but at this higher state of consciousness, we get the sum total of all our disguises, of who we were in all the different lives we have lived before. Whereas on the astral level, we barely remember the past life we have just left behind. And with a bit of effort, we are able to connect onto our memory on the astral plane, on the higher astral level, and we may pick up on previous lives, and we may even meet people who have not incarnated on Earth, who are old friends of ours from a few hundred years ago, from a past life, and we may rekindle these kind of friendships. So on the astral level, in the immediate afterlife state, we enhance our idea of who we were. We find we have more friends, you know. And one thing I was often I found very confusing was the fact that I met people who were really good friends, but when I came back to the physical body, I tried to place them in my physical reality, and I couldn't, because they were friends I only had on the astral level. So this is how reality works, and the greater reality works to an extent which makes our physical reality basically feel like a dream. So that is one of the first sort of things what I indicated earlier, what I felt I need to talk about in order to get a better picture of what reality is, because there's a lot of speculation, philosophical speculation, what reality is, but from an experiential point of view, it is so much more, and I, you know, a whole book could be written just from an experiential point of view.